Okay, so before we begin, I would like to tell you a little bit about myself, and to start with a big thank you to my colleague, Professor Nuno Araújo, who is also a vice president here at the SPA, for inviting me to be here. And my way to data science was a little bit convoluted. Growing up, I wanted to be a biologist and especially a geneticist. I wanted to work in genetical engineering. I grew up when the genome sequencing was taking off, and there was this big promise that every disease would be solved once we unlock the sequence of the human genome. And as you probably already know, that was not true. And the reason was because it was far more complex than anyone thought in the beginning. And that is why, after many months of pipetting in the lab and trying to come up with a way to make rice resistant to drought, I gave up a promising career in biology and tried to look for ways to still feed my passion about how to learn more about the world and about humans, but in what was becoming increasingly a data-intensive world. And today my talk is not just about data, but about what we want to achieve with data, which is knowledge. So one of the things that has followed me in my career in the last 20 years has been this evolution of the process of scientific discovery to becoming increasingly data intensive. In the last 20 years, we have witnessed the advent of high throughput techniques, so techniques that produce massive amounts of data in many sciences, including biology and physics. And so we have this fourth paradigm of scientific discovery, which is data intensive discovery. And data science has been key in helping scientists unlock the power behind data. But I think that we are actually going very fast beyond this paradigm of data-intensive research. And AI and generative AI is no stranger to this development. I think we are now beginning this new era of knowledge science. And today I will tell you what knowledge science is, the difference between data and knowledge, and that price of ignorance that we are paying if we only think about data and we forget about knowledge. So, in this new career as a researcher in computer science, I became in love with artificial intelligence and its potential to help us make sense of scientific data. But we have many challenges in using artificial intelligence as a scientific research tool. And I here highlight three of them. So one is that we have large amounts of data, but it don't come in standard formats. This is something that every data scientist is familiar with. You will spend most of your time data wrangling and not doing the super interesting things with machine learning algorithms, and also true in science. But then the data is super heterogeneous. You will have to perhaps work with structural data, genome sequence data, symptoms data, images, text, lots of different things. But the data is also super complex because it is about complex phenomena. And what we have right now is algorithms that are processing this data without understanding the data. Generative AI algorithms are very good because they can gobble up huge amounts of data and process it and uncover patterns behind it. But what they are doing in the process is taking everything that science has learned in the last centuries and putting it out into the trash. So we're looking at, like this morning, someone was telling you about AlphaFold. You input a protein sequence, which is just a sequence of characters that represents a protein sequence, and out comes a structure. Amazing. Does it explain why that happens? It doesn't. It doesn't tell you why that sequence is going to transform into that beautifully formed protein that works the way it does. And it is very, very far from explaining you why, if you change one single character in that sequence, the protein folds differently and causes a disease. So that's what we're missing for achieving this truly unlocking of the potential for AI in science, to be able to explain the things behind the data, to explain how and why things happen, so we can really use it for science. And what I'm going to try to convince you today is that knowledge science, and not data science, sorry, the SPA, knowledge science is actually key to tackle all of these challenges. So what is knowledge science? And I'm going to give you like a 2-minute intro course to knowledge science, very, very quick. And then I will show you examples of the world with and without it. So the big challenge in knowledge science is that we want to represent the meaning of data. And data is actually a representation of the natural world, right? A GDP, just a single number that represents the economic wellness of a country, or even more complex things. And here we have my favorite things, which are proteins. So a sequence of characters represents a protein. The 3D structure of the protein also is a representation. And at the bottom, we have a bit of text that tells you what this protein does in the human body. And all of these can be processed by computers with different algorithms in different ways. But knowledge science actually tries to give you a structured way to represent what we know. It is about modeling, or rather capturing, the meaning of data, the semantics of data. And it is something that has been designed to be understandable both to humans and machines. It is about taking real-world objects, such as a person, Anna, and her lung, and explaining the concepts behind those objects. So, for instance, that Anna is a human, and that humans have at most 2 lungs, and that the lung of Anna is part of her. This looks very obvious to you, but it is not obvious at all to a computer if you don't teach the computer that this is the world. Of course, if you ask ChatGPT, how many lungs does a human have? They will get the answer right, I'm pretty sure. But then how are you going to integrate that nifty little answer with all of the other types of algorithms that are being used in scientific research worldwide? And so my proposal is that knowledge graphs, which are these data structures that represent how data is connected and what the meaning of data is, are actually a very good way to inject knowledge into deep learning algorithms and AI approaches. But today, the subject of ignorance. And why am I interested in ignorance? Looking up at the dictionary, it's just lack of knowledge or information. Doesn't surprise anyone. And one interesting thing about ignorance is that you can solve it, you can learn, right? And usually, the more you learn, from knowing nothing to learning something to actually becoming an expert in it, the more confident you grow. This is what you would expect. But the reality for humans is actually a bit different. The Dunning-Kruger effect actually has shown, and it's a bit of a controversy, that in the beginning, when you are starting out, you know nothing, you have 0 confidence. But then quickly you gain a lot of confidence and you believe yourself to be an expert. But the real experts look at you and say, oh, you know nothing. And that is when you are at the peak of Mount Stupid. You believe you know, you think you know, you talk very confidently about it. Just like ChatGPT, very confident, but making lots of mistakes that I'm sure every one of you have encountered. But then you push on, you learn more. And that's where most PhD students find themselves when they start doing their PhD. You are in the valley of despair. The more you learn, the more, the more depressed you feel because it's going to be a bottomless pit of things to learn. But then you start slowly to rise out of it and achieve true competence on your way to enlightenment. And right now, I think that many of the generative AI algorithms are at the peak of Mount Stupid. Okay, they know lots of things, but they trust themselves too much. And they make humans trust them less because they are overconfident. So I think that one of the challenges that this community and the AI community at large needs to face is that we need to push these deep learning and AI models off the peak of Mount Stupid. We need to teach them more. We need to give them more knowledge. And we need them to be more able to say, I don't know. They're getting better at that. So GPT-4 is better at that, but still, they are too confident and they don't really know enough. But ignorance is uniformly distributed across all steps in a machine learning approach, and these are the 3 areas that I'm going to give examples today and to try to convince you that the world with knowledge science is better than the world without it. We're going to talk about data collection and preparation, model training, and model explanation and interaction. And so for my first chapter, it's a trap. Chapter 1, data collection and preparation. And I was very fortunate to follow our last speaker because he gave the perfect introduction to what I'm about to tell you. So, COVID hit, and of course it changed the lives of doctors, it changed the lives of everyone, but it also changed the lives of researchers. Researchers were now scrambling to learn more and more about COVID, and the rate of publications about COVID shot up, and we had thousands and thousands of scientific publications going around. Everybody was trying to do something with it. And one of the things that was really, really hot in the beginning of the pandemic was that we had no test. There was no test for COVID. And machine learning experts were trying to develop algorithms that take a CT scan of a COVID patient's lung and try to detect, okay, does this person have COVID or not? And now I'm going to test your ability to function as a radiologist or as a machine learning algorithm for computer vision. So 3 sets of lungs. 3 of these lungs have COVID, and the other 3 do not have COVID. Anyone can tell me which ones are the COVID ones? Do you think you can tell? I'm going to tell you that this was very easy for the machine learning algorithm to get it. The right ones, yes. It was very easy for the algorithms to get. But the reason it was very easy for them to get, it's because the lungs on the left are kids' lungs. They are lungs of children between 1 and 5 years old that had bacterial and viral pneumonia, and the lungs on the right-hand side are adult lungs. So the algorithms were not at all learning to differentiate between COVID and not COVID. They were learning adult versus kid. Why did this happen? It happened because the people developing the algorithms had no idea where the data came from. It was just lying around in one of those Kaggle data sets that many of you are probably familiar with no description of the origin. It just said CT scans of pneumonia. No description that they were children's lungs. So without knowledge of where your data comes from, you risk learning the wrong thing. And learning the wrong thing is also a kind of ignorance. To avoid a trap, if you are putting your data out there into your company repository or a public one, always have rich metadata. Make your data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And if you are looking for an interesting product, try to develop something that allows you to look at the data, look at the metadata, and identify potential biases in the questions that you can ask of those data. Don't mix up kids and adults if you are trying to predict for COVID. Chapter 2. You know nothing, Jon Snow. Model training. So here I want to tell you a bit of a story of a work one of my PhD students did. And his idea was that we have all of these rich data in electronic health records in a number of databases, but mostly they contain data and not knowledge. They don't tell you which disease has which symptoms or what you should test for if you're trying to diagnose something. They just tell you what is and not the concepts, the meaning. And so his question was, what would happen if we would take all of this data that is in electronic health records and enrich it with knowledge? Let's inject that knowledge into it. The scientific knowledge about diseases, procedures, drugs. And that's what he did. So he built, and if you remember from the beginning of the talk, a knowledge graph, something that takes data and adds meaning into it. And this meaning was descriptions of diseases, of drugs and how they work, of which drugs can be or should be administered to a disease. And he did all of that, and then he trained a machine learning model that was able to look at both the data and the meaning. And he asked the question, I have ICU patients, and I want to know which ones I can dismiss without risk of having them come back in the next 30 days. And this is also a COVID-inspired work because ICUs were full. And the decision of sending someone either home or to a lower risk ward was a crucial one. And what we found out was that by adding knowledge to the data in the electronic health records, we could help clinicians reduce ICU readmission by 40% with 0 too early discharges. No one was discharged that should have stayed, but 40% of the people that could go and release a bed earlier were given a discharge. And finally, chapter 3. If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. Model explanation and interaction. Another question that we had at the lab was about having this black box system, a system that you cannot understand, which makes predictions of which is the drug that is best for a given oncology patient. And then you want to put this in clinicians' hands, and they will not trust it unless they understand it. So how can we help oncologists understand if an AI black box recommendation is valid? And so in this European-funded project, with 20 different countries working on it, we are developing what is an explainable artificial intelligence for personalized oncology. And what we are doing, specifically in my team, is to take an AI recommendation that is black box, we only have the patient and the drug, and then use knowledge to provide justifications of the scientific validity behind that recommendation. And in this case, we can tell the doctor, okay, your patient has a mutation in this gene, and this mutation promotes the transcription, which is the activity, okay, of an enzyme, which is inhibited by the drug. So your mutation makes your enzyme go up, the drug makes it go down, so it's a good treatment for your patient. So take-home messages. Be more like Isaac Newton. Do stand on the shoulders of giants and reuse existing knowledge. Go beyond data and do not be afraid of it. And my advice here is to stay tuned for what I think is the next AI revolution. So it could be a topic for next year's. Which is neurosymbolic learning, which is this new field of deep learning that combines the part of deep learning, which is only data-based, with the part of symbols, the part of knowledge, the injection of knowledge and data at the same time into a single predictive system. And before I leave, of course, this work is the work of many wonderful people at my group, the Lisbon Semantic Data Lab, which is a part of LASIG and the Faculty of Ciências in Lisboa. And I'm only here, not because of my scientific work, but because I'm the coordinator of the Masters in Data Science at Ciências. And it's where you go if you want to learn how to think about data like a scientist and you want to get hands-on with complex data science challenges. So thank you very much.